This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And today I have on a husband and wife team, a medical team as well. Um, and I have both Tim and May with us. And when I read your bio on Podmatch, I realized that, you know what? We've never had a doctor on our show. So why not a husband and wife team? Let's see both sides of the story. But as I read your bio, you're more than just medical doctors. You look at people from all angles. And that's a comforting thing in today's world because too many of us walk into the doctor's office and they look at a list of our symptoms and they check them off, and either they say, hey, you're okay, even though you're hurting, or they say, oh boy, we should run 105 tests to figure out what you're even thinking. So tell me what it's like being a husband and wife medical team, and how is it that you run your practice that looks so different, at least on paper?
Wow. Well, thanks for having us on the show. We're both excited, honored to be here. I guess I'll start for Tim and just throw in my thoughts on that. So I guess it's very, it's pretty unique to be a husband and wife duo, although not that uncommon. In our medical school class, which was pretty small, and that was a long time ago, but up in Canada, we had 60 people in our class, and I think there was 5 couples in there. Mostly
Interesting.
because, you spend 4 years of intense education with I won't say no social time, but your social time is pretty limited, and you get to be really close to the people. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of relationships form out of that. So, husband and wife, duels and medicine is not that uncommon, I would say, but it's very unique as far as a life experience because we totally understand what each other's going through with career, what you bring home with emotional baggage, what you're dealing with, the struggles, and now everyone knows the issues with healthcare and that we all struggle with. So if you ask our children, now they're adults, what it was like growing up with a mom and dad physician couple, you would get another very biased opinion because they heard a lot of nasty, gross stories at the dinner table, a lot of shop talk. So, for us, as far as the relationship part goes, it's been mostly all positive because we can support each other. We know what each other's been through. Our practices have been a little different. So we both did family practice, residency and training. Tim did obstetrics. I was trained in it, but I knew that being a woman, I would get inundated and it would be the majority of my practice. And I value my sleep too much. So I opted out, and Tim was the one that got up in the middle of the night for the deliveries. But we both, we had a very busy initial career with rural family practice. We did all the hospital inpatient care of our own patients. We did the ICU, some minor ER call. It was busy. And so just the long story short, we're there to support each other. It was very hectic at times. The negative would be, just there's sometimes work can be too much and it's very hard to leave it aside.
Absolutely. I can't imagine, the things that you are bringing home, especially in a family practice, because you see a little bit of everything, and it just has to be tough.
Right. To segue into the second part of that though, before I let Tim talk, I'm trying to get my words in because he likes to talk. Is that, as far as what you asked about in practice, so being in family practice, we treat right from infants to death, and the whole individual. And that's really, man, like an honor. And I learned that right from med school in residency you're delivering a baby 1 minute. And then you're literally down the hall with, that could be the grandmother or someone's grandmother or parent or even child, unfortunately, holding their hand as they die. And there's nothing like, really, as Tim says, walking waist deep in humanity with people. I think that experience then really changes when you go to the office and you see people. And we're humans as doctors too. We could be having a bad day and we're tired, and it's just like a litany of what sounds like complaints, and we can't figure out the problem because it's difficult or just whatever. It's easy oftentimes to just go dismiss people and here's your Z-Pack, go away, are you happy, kind of an attitude. But for the most part, just being able to see people through life and death and being humans ourselves, and with our experiences, I think that we have had personally in our past, that have really touched us in unique ways. It brings a lot to the table to go, we treat the person as a patient first, and all the other stuff, the lab tests, etc., checking the boxes now that are required by metrics in healthcare are just there as tools that should be a supportive measure or to help what you do. And the person comes first. And so I'll leave it at that and throw it over to Tim.
Yeah, I think that it's, we achieved what we wanted to achieve, which was we wanted to live in a rural area. We wanted to be able to do everything. I mean, and that was really my goal.
We didn't do neurosurgery though.
No, but I wanted to do a full scope of, primary care. And so, I remember one weekend I was on call and we were assistant medical examiners as well. So I went to a funeral home. I had to do a death investigation of two kids that drove a car into a tree, high on meth, as they got chased through actually two or three different counties, and they landed in ours. So it was on our lap. And then I went to the hospital and I delivered actually a child for one of my buddies. It was his wife. And then I kept walking through the hospital and, held the hand of a guy that passed away that day. It's literally what it was like. And, I think, everything has positives and negatives as things develop and change and progress. And, medicine has become extremely fragmented. And, so now if you go to a hospital, even a small hospital, you are almost everywhere you're taken care of by a hospitalist. So they might have a little bit more technical proficiency because that's all they do, but they don't know your family. They don't know, they don't have the experience that we've had as far as understanding these people and the privilege of like being immersed in these people's lives. I had this one entire family see me because, at the time, this couple was not married. They were actually very, very young. And this guy had this really bizarre medical complication. We managed to sort it out. We got him better. It was very harrowing, especially as a young country doctor. And then, of course, I see the entire family. And then they get married and we get invited to the wedding. And then I deliver their first child. And then I deliver the sister-in-law's babies. And then it was just like time and again, it was just amazing. And it did a lot of things. It allowed us to have this connection to the community that really most people in different careers couldn't have. And then secondly, it made you a really good doctor because you learned a lot. Like you saw a lot of really intense things. So as medicine changed and it became more fragmented and more regulated and really was captured by medical regulation, in my opinion, and that's a whole other conversation. I'd been involved in leadership in our healthcare system, in working for insurance companies and all of this. And I'm just like, we got to do something different. So May originally went to urgent care about 10 years ago. I followed a few years after that. And then we just basically left corporate medicine about just over a year ago and have started, helped one of our former residents start a private clinic. And that has been super rewarding in an entirely different way. It's still in the same community. But we felt we were really disappointed with the response of a lot of large organizations to treating COVID patients. And we thought, if you're in the middle of a pandemic, I think doctors are supposed to treat sick people. Like that's kind of our first primary job. So we just saw everybody. And we managed to get our hands on tons of monoclonal antibodies through the state. We just asked them. We set up our own protocols, and we had people coming from surrounding states because we would actually see sick people and treat them with, what was arguably the most effective early treatment. And it's just been amazing.
Just listening to the two of you, it reminds me growing up here in the States in the 50s and 60s. I remember my pediatrician, he actually came to the house on a couple of occasions. And I don't think any of us kids were that ill. And, I remember when I was getting married, I asked my mother if we could invite him. And he had Alzheimer's at the time. And my mother said, well, we'll send an invitation. We'll see what he says. And his daughter brought him to the wedding, and he remembered me, did not remember my parents, but remembered me. And, it's sad because we don't have that in most medical practices. So kudos to the two of you, for understanding that it's not just the symptoms, it's the person who is having those symptoms. Now, I know you're from Canada, so there's so many of us here in the States that say, oh, we wish we had the medical system you have up there. So tell me, obviously you sort of moved out of it. Is it working? Because our system isn't.
Well,
There's a reason we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May will start, but you've opened a can, and if you're happy to open that can, I mean, I've worked in tons of medical leadership stuff here, and so kind of seen all sides. Had family members that have practiced for decades in the Canadian system, and we've been injured by the Canadian system. I mean, so living in the United States, so we'll be happy to.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time. So I know that I'll say that for us, we moved down here and right as soon as, almost after we finished our residency, and what was happening at the time. So first off, the big picture is that Americans assume that what's happening in different countries, such as Canada, even though it's like right next door, or Europe with the socialized healthcare, or Australia, that the American culture is the same as these other countries' culture, and it's not.
Yeah.
So that is a big, important piece, because what happens in these other countries, and Canada, we can speak to that, which has the population the size of California, is also, a key factor because it's much smaller, but geographically very large, and people are spread out, is the culture is very different, and people up there are willing to accept what the government tells them in healthcare to let them control the purse strings, so to speak. At least they had been, and are pretty much adopt the attitude of, I'll get in line and wait, and this is how it is. Not everybody, but so with that comes a different attitude toward what to expect out of your healthcare. The whole you can have it all now, just like you can drive up to McDonald's or get your burger when you want it, or the bank teller, or your Amazon package arrives today or tomorrow. And healthcare is the same. I want my hip replacement because I can't golf, or when it comes to even horrible things, unfortunately, a serious medical event, or a bad gallbladder that's keeping you out of work, you don't just get to snap your fingers and get it the same way. So there, one payer controls the purse strings, controls the time.
Well, and the other problem with it is the payer's political.
Yeah. So back to
which is an entire other level of potential corruption, and the ability to
so what basically how we what made us change, because for us in family practice, what happened was the government controlling things, and back in the 90s said, we don't have enough primary care doctors in rural areas. People are we need to get help out there, and the way we can maybe control that is by limiting, so they are the payer, limiting the payment, it's called the billing number that you get to bill the government for your services, limiting the billing numbers unless the physicians that are in primary care stay in the province that they are trained in. So what happened was they set up this moratorium, and you could not you could only work in whatever province you did, I think, med school and your residency. So those fresh graduates coming out were like, we're really limited. Can you imagine a doctor in the US being told that they can only practice in the state they did their training? They could not go anywhere else. So they would
Not
not.
at all. Yeah.
So that happened, and there was a big exodus of people, including new grads and old, to the US as well. At the same time, the HMO system was coming in. You needed to get a primary care doctor in the US. You couldn't just specialist hop because they're trying to save money. So there was a big recruit from the US to Canada. Hey, do you want to come down? So we and probably 20% of our graduating residency class left Canada for the US. And when we came down here, things were much different as family docs initially, because in Canada, you need to go through a specialist, for instance, to get an MRI. If you got back pain or you tore your ACL in your knee, your PCP cannot just like click their fingers and you're getting an MRI in 2 weeks. There is a long wait. I think it was 6 months to get into the neurosurgeon, let alone the MRI for your back.
Wow.
So, for us as family docs, we're like, what? I know my patient has this injury in their knee. They're going to get it. I can order an MRI myself. This is crazy. So it really was eye-opening how much we had at our fingertips. But aside from that, to even look at how things are now, so our family living in Canada has been through a lot of medical things, and to see what happens as you get in line and wait when you're paying large taxpayer dollars. And that's the other thing, is taxes are much higher in Canada to cover the costs of this socialized program. For instance, I'll just throw it out there. My mother, who got it was a long diagnostic process. She had cancer. She had a rare type of stomach cancer, intestinal cancer. It's called carcinoid. And it's hard to diagnose, but she was having symptoms for months. And finally, when she got in to seek medical care, it took from September to December that year of her having severe diarrhea, weight loss, extreme symptoms they started treatment, and it took till Christmas for her to get a diagnosis. And at that point, she waited. She was on the wait list to see the oncologist. So no chemotherapy happening, nothing. It's like, well, you got to wait because we don't have any room to see.
No, she waited.
So we brought her to the US, started treatment, got her into our friend who's an oncologist. Canada basically said, you left the country, you wash your hands of all responsibility. They wouldn't pay for any treatment, medication. Unfortunately and sadly, it was an aggressive form of cancer, and she passed in 3 months. And they called us, I think it was a couple of days after.
No, they called us. I answered the phone. They said, we're from the cancer clinic. We have an appointment for your mother-in-law, and it'll be, in a week. And I said, well, that's great, because she died yesterday. She literally stood in line till she died. And that's
not unique. You hear politicians coming.
It's by design.
Yeah.
Like, why would you close operating rooms for elective surgeries? When we lived there, I'm not sure exactly what it's like now, because it's been almost 30 years. But when we lived there and we're finishing our training, they closed operating rooms for elective procedures. And I think it's still like that now, for the entire summer. So then if it's the only way you get a surgery is if it's an emergency surgery. So we have a person that we know very well, who's a young, healthy person with a young family, who has an easily treatable surgical problem that causes pain. But because it's not causing a life-threatening emergency,
currently,
you're going to wait for 2 or 3 months and not be able to work and not be able to do stuff with your family, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why are you doing that? Why would you restrict access? Well, you restrict access so that the people in line fall off the line. I tell patients all the time, they're like, oh, I want the Canadian system. Why would you leave? And I go, okay, when you need your hip replacement, do you want to wait 2.5 years? Because that's how long it takes. 2.5 years. Not
and
2.5.
I thought things were slow here in the United States. So, I'm so glad we're having that conversation. Yeah.
No, I'm not defending the American system. Trust me, there is stuff here that is so completely insane that it's hard to even comprehend. And we can get into that too. But the fact is that this panacea, this idea that the government will just pay for it, and it will do 2 magical things. Everyone will have access, okay, well, hardly anybody has the access they want now. Okay. And it will get cheaper. Well, what's anything that the government has done that they've taken payment control and modified markets that's got cheaper? Like, tell me anything. Well, not
Right.
because then it becomes a political football. And then it becomes, the largesse of and the grift of the government deciding who gets paid for what. And then it just becomes even more bloated. And so, we have to bring competition back into healthcare, which will bring innovation, which will drop costs, which will increase access. That's what does it. And I mean, I have what I think is what I listened to one commentator and I was like, you know what? That's the only time I've heard anything that makes any sense. And basically what he said is highly specialized care should be you figure out what the market price is and you kind of you socialize that side, because a back surgeon shouldn't get paid more if they do more back surgeries. They should get paid based on the fact that they do the correct back surgeries.
Interesting.
So
Yep.
having a completely capitalistic system based on competition for, emergency surgery or trauma or whatever doesn't make sense. You could do that in elective orthopedic surgeries, cosmetic surgeries, et cetera. And then primary care should be absolutely 100% deregulated, competitive, cash-based, because the price would go through the floor, because now we would be fighting for patients and patients would be using, health savings accounts to come and see us. So, I'd be competing with the guy next door and we would be, doing cost things or memberships. And there's evidence of this already working in the direct primary care model in the United States, which is vastly less expensive for patients, all cash based, 75 to $100 a month. And then you have open access to your doctor. The doctor answers the phone when you call. He or she has a very small patient panel. You get the personalized care like we talked about at the beginning of the show, and the quality of care, the quality of the relational experience, everything goes up, and the physician for the most part, they maintain their incomes.
So so it's not like what I'm witnessing here in the Cleveland area where almost every doctor is owned by the hospital system. I just had an appointment yesterday with my cardiologist. I actually have not seen him in a year. I only see the nurse practitioner because I'm not sick enough, which, okay, that makes me feel good. I'm not sick enough, but I'm paying to go see my doctor. And I didn't grow up in a world where, the nurse practitioner may be absolutely perfect, but we have to understand the difference between the trainings of both. And, why is it I never see a doctor anymore unless I'm really, really sick?
Do you really want to know?
Yes, I do. Great
I
conversation.
tell you, 'cause I've worked on the insurance side. I've worked on physician recruitment, and now I see the inner workings of a private clinic where we have to try to get every cent we can out of insurance companies. It's money based. I mean, there's a little bit of what we call physician extender, where if you have a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner, you can kind of see more patients. But if you look at the margins with what you would have to pay a board certified cardiologist compared to what you pay a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant, and then you multiply that by, the 6,000 physicians you have in your hospital system, if you're, a medium to large size system, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars of increased revenue. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, this has become essentially a financially based system, and it has been captured by regulators, in my opinion, and it's been captured by gigantic corporations, both the insurance side and the pharma side. And so, we think that this is a free market system. Like, I've gotten to tons of debates with people. It's like, well, it's a free market and the free market screwed it up. No, the free market is why everyone can have, why we've been on mission trips 10 years ago in the Philippines and people are texting on smartphones. That's the free market. Access to really high tech, technology at very affordable prices for what the market will bear. What we have here is a completely bastardized market where it's controlled largely by Medicare and Medicaid. They set a lot of the prices. The insurance companies come in, it's third party payment. So you never feel the pain of actually paying for something. So you have all of this hidden sort of shell game going on in the background. And then you wonder why it's so expensive. Well, it's like they're
Yeah.
because they can get away with it.
And I'm going to hop in, and aside from that, as you know, going to the more not emotional, but the logical side, thinking as a both being a physician, getting sending my patients into a specialist, and being like over the top frustrated because I'll manage a condition, and we were trained very well. We all have our little niches, but certain areas I was very good. Women's hormone therapy, I had skin, whatever it is. I would manage that patient to the end of my ability. And as a family practice doc, I'm like, okay, I know this really well. I'm stuck with this person's, say, birth control regulation because this is a tricky patient. I really need help tweaking this. I'm going to refer to gynecology to get their expertise. Well, there's nothing more frustrating than when you do that, and or it could be cardiology, pick your specialty. They get in and you read the report. They've seen a mid-level provider and not an actual physician who has the same or more training, way more training than I in family practice, but they see a mid-level with less knowledge, and they get you don't even do any justice to the patient, and you feel like you're going backwards. And I'm like, well, they did less than what I've been doing. This is not helpful. And even as a patient,
no, it's very helpful. It's very helpful because the physician and the hospital system primarily gets to bill for that as a consult.
No, I know.
So it's incredibly helpful. It's just not helpful to you or the
Yeah,
patient.
you've wasted the patient's time. I'm doing more for them already. A bunch of tests often get ordered, and it's so frustrating. And then I've been on the patient side of that as well,
Oh my
myself, and on our family. Go in to see a specialist for a problem. I don't get the specialist, and I see a mid-level, and I'm like, I know more about this than you. Please, can I see doc that's running this company? No, because they're not even the same town, and they have this clinic. It's very frustrating. Yes, from even a physician point of view, sending patients as well as patient. And my personally would say, the biggest thing is money. There's excellent mid-levels out there, and we've worked with some where I'm like, you're just as well trained now and with your experience that you are like almost an equal knowledge base as us doing this job. But for the most part, you're right. The training is an experience and hours, and why we spend all these sleepless nights as interns and residents is to get that much exposure and experience. But these people are supposed to be extenders of healthcare. They're supposed to be assistants. And so it's great when I see them, I'm at my orthopedist office and they're there in the OR assisting. And yes, they're doing the pre-op physicals and they can see patients with basic type stuff. But when they're actually given the reins to just take over care, especially in primary care without supervision as it's supposed to be guiding them, then that's frightening because it's a whole different level of care. And patients often don't know. I mean, heck, we live in a small town and I hear patients seeing someone in the urgent care or even a practice clinic and they call them Dr. So-and-so. Like, they're not a doctor. Oh, I know, but they do just the same thing. I'm like, well, so it's
yeah, I mean,
frustrating.
It's frustrating, and it's really hard for us because some of these people are really close friends of ours. Some of them are some mid-level providers are, I mean, I'd have them see my family before some of my physician colleagues. So, but when you look at it kind of from 10,000 feet and you go, wow, they seem to have a really high referral rate from primary care. And you start doing the math on that. And if we go back to a capitated system where, you're getting paid per patient per month, not per procedure, then they become very expensive because, whether or not you have to pay me, 1.5 times more per hour to do my job, it doesn't mean much if the person I'm working next to is ordering $3,000 MRIs at a rate that's 10 times mine. I mean, you've eaten those costs times a million.
Yeah. My bias too, just from, our experience working in primary care and urgent care is that, and this is globally, this is not, is that it does cost a lot more money when the knowledge base isn't there and they need to order more tests, more expensive imaging for something that someone with more training and experience, and that's an MD or DO would say, well, I know what that is. There's no test. You don't need a test to tell you that that's just a little sebaceous cyst under your arm. You don't need an ultrasound or an MRI of your arm, but it happens all the time. And then, then we wonder why costs go up. So that's our experience.
Well, as I'm listening to you, I happen to be on Medicare. I happen to be of that age. And one of the things that I'm finding is that if my husband and I get ill and we go to the emergency room, and not so much with me, but my husband is white hair, as white as can be. They automatically say to me, does he understand what he's going through? And I'll look at them and I'll go, well, talk to him. He's right there. They undermine people based on their age. And so my husband went in, he had a horrible ear infection. We knew it was an ear infection just by the feel of it and everything else. And they wanted to convince him that he was having a stroke. And I said, well, if he's having a stroke, are you going to give him medication to stop the stroke? Well, until we figure it out. And so not only did he have a CAT scan, then they sent him for an MRI. And then they said, it really may be an ear infection, but we don't have an ENT on staff. It's Sunday.
What?
And I just sat there thinking, we could have waited this out at home. But what scared him was all of a sudden it hurt and then he lost his hearing totally. And so it was like, okay, that's unusual. That's never happened. And so I contacted the hospital and I went through the whole thing. You treated him like he didn't exist, like he had dementia. He was very alert. In fact, he was making jokes, even though he couldn't hear out of one ear. And you ran up a bill because you didn't listen to what he was saying. And you didn't look at his previous charts to see that he collects a lot of wax in his ears on a regular basis. He hadn't had his ears cleaned in 3 months. So, and the hospital said to me, well, then maybe you shouldn't have come here. And that's why I was so excited about having the two of you on, because we need to talk about medicine. There are good doctors out there. There are good, nurse practitioners and physician assistants. But we have to understand why we're being treated by them. And when can we, as patients, ask to be seen by that specialist? When is it your responsibility as a doctor to actually read my chart and know my history? And I know it's not easy. Okay. I don't expect you to be miracle people, but it sounds like what you're doing in your practice is you're trying to give your patients enough information so that they can heal.
Yeah, I would like to do an advertisement here for direct primary care.
Absolutely.
We've interviewed 1 or 2 direct primary care physicians. Actually, one of the best medical student I ever had runs a direct primary care clinic in a town close to ours. And we don't do it. If we were starting out, that's what we would do. But we're at the tail end of our medical career, and who knows what we're going to do for the next 20 years, but it'll be something different. Maybe I'll sell used cars or something. But
hey,
it is a tremendous model. And so, the way it works the best is if you have kind of a major medical policy. So, if you need a bypass or something like that, that's covered. And then you build a robust enough medical savings account so that you can cover the deductibles on your major medical. And then it's depending on where it is and what services you kind of sign up for, it's reasonable. It's $75 to $100 a month. And then you get a direct primary care doctor. You know, virtually 100% of the time you call, you're going to get him or one of his partners, depending on his practice. There's no insurance. So you're not getting calls from insurance companies. You're not getting bills from insurance companies. It's a membership only kind of system. And the patients that do this, they love it. This friend of mine, his practice, he got into kind of the faith communities. And so they have the faith-based cost shares, which they're paying for their entire family, $300 or $400 a month for disaster coverage. Then they do another, whatever it is, $150, $100 for the rest of their family. And they pay a fraction of what you would pay in the open market for health insurance. And they're getting way better primary care because because he has 600 patients. He knows everybody, and it is the way to save the system, because the way primary care has been co-opted now by the regulators, it's quality metrics. So when and patients need to understand how these health systems are getting paid now is through a back end deal, where if the system and the individual providers can tick enough boxes in the electronic medical record to show that they're meeting quality metrics, that is an absolute bonanza of cash. So that's why you have not seen your primary care doctor for 6 months, and you go in with a hangnail and you're like, can I have some antibiotics? And you can pull this chunk of nail out of my finger. They're going to ask you, how many beers do you drink? Do you fall asleep drunk? Are you depressed? Does your spouse beat you up? Why are they doing that? Because they care so much? No, because that's how they get paid.
Wow.
Back to your frustration with and what's happening in the ER, and how do people advocate for themselves or their family when they're in there, and why is this happening? I mean, like I can just go down again that bunny trail, feeling the same thing, personally experiencing it, our friends, but having worked on the urgent care side and knowing what's happening. I mean, I tell people, you really don't want to go to the emergency room unless you really have to, because of the thinking is different, and they are there, and sadly it's filled, it's busy. They have a lot of mid-levels or nurses screening and triaging patients because they're there expecting the worst case scenario, and that's what they think first. I think backwards from what we would do is like, common things are common. It's most likely, yes, an ear infection or plugged wax or yada, yada. And then, you base it on the history, the findings. They are driven to make sure it's not the worst case scenario. And then there's the litigation part in the back, because you cross the threshold into the ER, you better not miss something devastating or life-threatening, because the litigation piece. So there's a lot of CYA, cover your ass, so to speak. So they're thinking, okay, old person, possibly, absolutely, we don't want to miss a stroke or a tumor, yada, yada. So it's almost like it goes in reverse until they've ruled out all the worst things, and it can only possibly something minor. And now you have this massive bill, and you weren't heard because you're getting all these tests done. And that's how I see it. And so when that's why, I tell people, if you had access through direct primary care to your physician on the weekend, or whoever's on call and can say, hey, or an urgent care or a community where you have a good rapport with someone, that makes the most sense. And I get it, on the weekend, sometimes you're not going to wait because you've got this excruciating pain. And it's an emergency in your mind, and it's hurting, and you need help and treatment. So unfortunately, sometimes the things that are minor become emergencies. I understand that because I've been in there with my family, but that's how the thinking is. And so that you have to know that risk, that they're going to be looking for the worst type stuff,
But in a direct primary care model, how that would work, once you've established a relationship with your physician, is they go, oh, Bill's calling. Oh, I remember Bill. He gets ear infections every 3 months. So, hey, Bill, tell me if this is okay. We're going to call in some antibiotics, and I'm going to see you on Monday morning. And, if you get a worsening headache, if you get super dizzy, if you whatever, those are emergencies, then you need to go to the ER. Otherwise, if it starts getting better, that's great. We'll double check it. If we need to clean out any wax, we'll have Sally. She's really good at it. She'll take care of that for you, and we'll see you Monday. Well, my father was a primary care doctor in Canada for 43 years. That was his entire life.
Yep.
Like, oh, well, you got a UTI. Oh, you just got back from a vacation in Vegas. Well, I wonder where that came from. We call in the antibiotics and it's done.
Yeah.
And, that's actually fantastic medicine because the patient. That is the key. You as a patient are working in tandem with a partner, just like I have people that work on my vehicles and I have a really good friend who's a plumber. It's like, I know who I can call and trust. And I know they're going to take care of whatever issue I have. Now
It's the opposite.
It's-
It is. We all hop around. We get in a system, and we don't even. Gosh, women aren't even their babies aren't delivered by the same OB that they. It rotates every time you go in, and it can be that way for your heart care. You could see
Right.
a different practitioner every time you go in. There's no consistency. There's no trail of a relationship, which is really important. Aside from, you see the same person and they get to know you and your history and they remember, but then there's not even a personal relationship. So that's all huge and missing.
Well, I will tell you, our primary care physician, he is bucking the system all the time. When we come in, he spends that time talking to us. He knows us. He knows our son. He knows my other son, who he's never ever met. And the first thing is, after trying to calm us down if we're sick, is to ask about the family. And I'll tell you, it's so comforting. And he does know everything about us, but he can't treat us for all those things because insurance says, no, send them somewhere else. So I love this family practitioner type care. I know there's a couple places here in Northeast Ohio where they've been advertising some of these programs. Although the one that is closest to us does not take Medicare. So, it's like, well, I'm already paying into the system. Do I want to double pay? But I'm starting to think maybe it would be a really good idea. How do you get the word out so that people start to understand what is really going on? Because most of us are really oblivious.
Well, that's where our podcast came from, which I think is aptly named BS Free MD. I had been super frustrated with just stuff that, just didn't make any sense. Like I'd sit in these committee meetings and, they're trying to do outreach. For instance, they're trying to do outreach to people on our Medicaid programs that are very impoverished, et cetera, and they're sending mailers. Like, I think it's really important to preach the gospel in the language with which the listener understands. And I'm fairly well educated, and if you sent me a mailer, I'd throw it out. I'm pretty sure the person that's a single parent that's suffering from addiction and has 3 kids is not reading your mailer.
Right.
Well, we have to, and they're, all this time crafting this great, this great document or whatever. And you sit there and you just go, my gosh, we have a whole bunch of unbelievably smart people in this room, but they've never practically lived in the world that they're trying to serve. So how can they serve it? And that's just a small example, like over and over again. And so, we started the podcast at the beginning of COVID because people were freaking out and didn't know. And if you listen to our live streams from March of 2020, when we started to now, our opinions have changed wildly because it was an emerging, and we said that it's an emerging pandemic. Things are going to change. And as they change, we need to update, kind of what we're doing and how we're thinking
right.
about approaching this. And it's been it's been wildly rewarding. So that's our little piece to
Yeah.
the puzzle of how you get the word
And
out.
I think that it's becoming more common. I mean, there's podcasts are a big way. There's a lot of healthcare podcasts specific to healthcare policy and systems. There's physicians who have direct primary care doing podcasts, and you're hearing it more. You're right. It might be a little biased from us because we're in the medical circle, so we hear it. But you know, if people sort of pay attention to, you'll see articles in the paper, magazines, smatterings of things in different parts of the country, you know, then it's starting to take root. I mean, it's a small little seedling root, but I think it's going to start to spread slowly. But you're right. I mean, hey, we're all for more input and ideas. What people that aren't, you know, that like you that say, hey, what could we do better to get the word out as physicians and healthcare workers in general about how to change system and get that knowledge out there? What works? We know what doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, we know it doesn't, and it's really easy to kind of, you know, curse the darkness and not light the candle. But I think it's really critically important for people to know how we get paid as physicians, and what our financial incentives are. I mean, I think that's real. I mean, I think it's part of an ethical relationship. And, you know, I know that if I buy an iPhone, that that money goes to Apple and it enhances the stock price and all of those things. But exactly what happens when you sign up for insurance with work or with Medicare, and then that money kind of gets sucked into this black hole, and how it appears in my paycheck, most people have absolutely zero concept. To be honest with you, most physicians have almost zero concept of how that happens. And so when there's all of these people kind of in this financial darkness, it's not surprising it gets more expensive. It's not surprising services don't necessarily get better, because, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And so all of us really need to educate ourselves on how this works. And I would really encourage your listeners to look things up like MIPS, MIPS, and MACRA, MACA, MACRA,
Yeah.
which are regulations on how primary care doctors get graded by Medicare.
Wow.
Yes.
I had no idea.
Exactly. And so literally there is the carrot, which is, if you do the metrics properly, we'll pay you extra money at the end of the year. Kind of like when you buy a car and they finance it, and at the end of the year, they get this big chunk of money from the financing company. And then we have a stick, which is, if you don't do these metrics to the level to a baseline level, then you'll get bad marks in your MIPS and MACRA scores. And if it's bad enough, you can't enroll in Medicare. You can't take Medicare patients.
Wow.
So the regulatory capture of, and this is all I know. Like, I don't know what it's like for an orthopedic surgeon, because I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but I can tell you from a primary care perspective, the regulatory capture of this is staggering. And so it's like, why are you seeing a frustrated doctor for 10 minutes with a 20-minute problem? Well, that's why. Why am I spending 20 minutes of my appointment with a medical assistant who may be the nicest person in the world, who's asking me personal questions about, you know, potential domestic violence and depression, and then I'm spending 5 or 10 minutes with the doctor? Well, that's why. It's because the regulatory capture and the way that we get paid is getting pushed into these it is essentially the federal government setting the rule, with insurance companies setting the rules on what good medical practice is, and saying, you will do these things or it's not good medical practice. Well, did any of these regulators go to medical school that wrote the rules? Did any of these people at the part, you know, DHS and CMS, you know, or is it written by an expert panel of internal medicine doctors?
And there's a trickle down, and I think people see this now and see the light with pharma, and that it crosses over into what's being prescribed as
Oh,
well.
absolutely.
So I think most people know that now. If you have diabetes or hyperlipidemia and you have your labs in there and the doctor's having to follow the MIPS and macro and screen every 3 months, it's like, if you don't prescribe X drug for this, then you're being penalized. And
They don't directly necessarily, now they do for some drugs,
yes,
but they don't directly say thou shalt prescribe X drug,
no,
but indirectly,
indirectly,
it's like,
yes.
well, you haven't met this metric. You haven't met this, blood pressure or whatever. But I mean, it gets so ridiculous. When this was first being rolled out, I got a letter from one of the insurance companies because I had not examined a diabetic patient that I had. I had not examined his feet, because a diabetic foot exam is part
Right.
of diabetic care. Okay. Well, he had no freaking legs.
But whoever reviews the charts to approve this sees, no exam, and they called the patient and said, did Dr. Hindmarsh do this, because he's billing for the diabetic exam, yet he didn't complete all the modalities of it.
And he's like, I have no legs.
And this happens all the time. I mean,
It's unbelievable. I totally understand it. And what I'm going to do in our show notes. So for those of you listening, if you said, I don't remember something, number one, we're going to put your podcast in the show notes, because it's about time we start getting a little bit smarter about things. I know I have some very good doctors. And I hate to say it, but I've shopped around for doctors because it's my life, it's my health. It's interesting what you say about medication. I've had an immune disorder for about 10 years. And I finally found a doctor who said, oh, I know how to treat this. And he's done a pretty good job of it. But one of the medications he put me on blew me up almost 30 pounds in less than a month. And when I called him and I said, I have never been this round my whole life. Well, do you want to try to get rid of the disease, or do you want to be thinner? I said, well, I'd like both if possible.
yes.
But I said, I'm uncomfortable because I was swollen. And as he's weaned me off the medication, I swear he must be getting a kickback from the pharmaceutical company, because he's been weaning me now for 6 months, and he takes me off like a 0.5 milligram a month. Now I'm finally at the point where a lot of it has come off, but the disease is in remission. But I never got good answers from him. Did I have to be on this? Could I have been on something else? By blowing up that much, my cardiologist was all upset. No, you can't have that much weight on you. Okay. We need to start talking. We need to start listening. And so I hope my listeners will start listening to you, and we'll do some more research, because it's our life.
Well, what I'd like to say sort of in closing is, to your point, it's your body, it's your health, it's your life. You have to advocate for yourself. And myself I'm a patient as well. And I know how to navigate the system a little better than the general lay person that's not in medicine. But it's tough. But yes, you have to be your best advocate, and your body, and get different opinions. Do the shopping around. There's nothing wrong with that. You would do that for anything else. One size doesn't fit all. And there is one. It's often more than one way, and dual modalities and adjunctive things to treat a problem. So if you feel like this just doesn't sound right, or I think there's more out there, or I want something else, yes, get other opinions. It doesn't mean what you're thinking is always right, but do your research, do your homework, because it's your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to dovetail on that, sometimes making a cash investment in things is not bad. we've become sort of insurance centric, and if insurance doesn't cover it, we don't want to do it because, by golly, I paid into it and I'm going to get something out of it. Kind of the buffet mentality. If it's all you can eat chicken fingers, they're going to lose money on me. And so, eh, you know, it's your health. And if there's an outside the box thing that isn't covered by insurance that's working really well and making you feel good and improving your quality of life, how much is that worth? I mean, we live in a community where people will spend $90,000 on a pickup truck and another $4,000 on wheels and tires and another $4,000 jacking it up into the sky, and I'm like, okay, so now you got a $110,000 rig, and unfortunately, you're still 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Paying a little money for massage therapy for their back problem, it's
Right.
like out of the question.
Or if you're like, what, you sleep like 8 to 10 hours a day, and your back is jacked up because you're sleeping on a $15 mattress that you could never give away at a yard sale, and you have a $110,000 pickup truck. Maybe you should spend like $6,000 on the mattress. Well, I can't do that. That's a mattress. I'm like, yeah. And it's 8 hours of your day, So I think sometimes, taking ownership, even financially, a little bit, even though it drives us nuts because we're getting kind of fleeced from what we pay for, sketchy stuff in the insurance world, is still I think oftentimes still very, very worth it.
Well, I thank you for all your input. Again, tell us what your podcast is so we can find it.
It's called BS Free MD, just like it sounds, BSFREEMD. And we're on most podcast platforms. You can find us there, and our website is bsfreemd.com.
We will get that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the education. I appreciate it.
We had a great time talking today. Thanks for having us on.
Sure. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.